Mr. Reardon here. This video will serve to walk you through one possible approach to the a college level synthesis unit essay on education. Again, we're talking about the first prompt. So here's the prompt. What are the three most significant problems with public education systems in America today? What solutions do you propose to these problems? Be sure you explain exactly how these solutions could solve the problems you identify in your essay. Again, I'm going to give you just one possible approach here. You can write whatever essay you'd like, right? As long as you're responding to the prompt, you can use a structure that works for you. Since this is a synthesis essay, I'm going to be walking you through a way this paper would look that does adhere fairly closely to what I've already taught you about synthesis. But you don't necessarily have to follow every piece of this structure if that's not what works for you. I really would like this to be an opportunity for you to write an essay that is of a structure that works for you, and that I really want this to be an opportunity for you to be creative while also still responding to a prompt, because you will have a lot less structure when you write essays in college, and you won't necessarily have you won't be told what to do as much, and you'll have a lot more freedom, and you'll have to know how to manage that freedom. You might also understand this video as a sort of a model for the kind of thinking you're going to have to do on your own later in your education. So we're going to go ahead and start with a hook. Oh, wait, one more thing. You need to revise your thinking sheet after watching this video. I imagine that by the time you're watching this video, you have completed and uploaded your the synthesis essay thinking sheet. And so you've already done some thinking about this essay prompt. You've already talked to someone else if you're watching this in class. And so you at this point, you're just taking some ideas that are here, and you will be adding to them as you move forward. You might make some changes to what you have for your plan. You might only make a few changes. You might make a lot of changes. You might really like this structure and want to use it. So you could be anywhere on a spectrum from using very little of this to completely overhauling your thinking. And either both are fine, and being anywhere else on that spectrum is fine. All right, so for a hook, I recommend you tell a story related to your own experience in public school, and considering that this essay is focused on problems, I would recommend in particular that you um, maybe talk about Pally, right? Talk about your own school experience. Now, if you just don't really have a shortcoming that you've experienced firsthand, you could also talk about or tell the story of someone else's struggle in school, and a shortcoming that they had to of the school system that they had to navigate. So once you finish hook, you can move on to exigence. In this case, I think you really need to capture this idea presented in the prompt, right? That many people, so intellectuals, researchers, but also students, parents, and teachers, and popular culture, have been questioning the effectiveness of public education for a long time. I mean, you can just a quick search on the internet for funny teacher memes or funny classroom images or whatever, funny videos. You can just find so much stuff that critiques, lambasts, satirizes public education. This has been a big issue. You need to bring this idea and the fact that this exists as a question into your introduction. That will be the exigence for your argument. And then a possible thesis. I'm giving you a structure here that you might use, and you can use this could be used. This structure would actually work even if you don't use the rest of what I'm providing for you here. So your thesis statement. While the education students can receive in the average American public high school is sufficient for the success of many students, there still exist problems that need addressing. These problems include thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3. Respectively, potential solutions to these problems include 1, 2, and 3. Right, so I just realized there's some color coding missing here. I'm going to add this right now. You might see that word respectively right there, just above where I'm currently adding some color. And what that means is that each of these problems corresponds to solutions. And right, so if you have a problem, if you mention a problem here for number one, what should be here is the solution, a potential solution to problem number one. Now, these solutions can just be something that you think might work. They don't necessarily have to be something that is research-based yet, right? It just take this opportunity to be creative and to think of something, think of one change that could be made that could help to solve the problem. Now, as for some problems that you might consider putting in here, I made a little bit of a list. So the achievement gap between white and non-white students, which sort of ties to the third fishbowl and some of the ideas that were brought up in some of those texts. The use of text and literature courses like English that collectively incite dislike of reading. The generally unquestioned factory line model of organizing public education. Think Sir Ken Robinson. Too much emphasis on lecture followed by individual performance and insufficient opportunity for collaboration, right? This idea of like you're lectured and then you're tested in isolation, being atomized. That's also in the Robinson video and in the text on MOOCs that you read. So that's a possibility. Lack of opportunity for creativity, self-exploration, divergent thinking. Too much focus on grades and achievement, especially at high achieving schools, so much so that learning is a cost. You could actually, even though this is essay number one, you could bring in some of Excellent Sheep and William Deresiewicz. And then, of course, again, you have to be sure you can explain why the problem is a problem. You have to be able to warrant that presentation of a problem. If you can't do that, then you need to choose a different problem. Alrighty, so with that, you've chosen 3 problems, you've drafted 3 solutions. That's your thesis, and so naturally the rest of your essay is going to be organized in this same fashion. And you'll notice the color coding remains consistent. So I'm actually going to give you 2 different approaches for how you could write this essay, like what the body paragraphs could look like and what you do in each one. So here's your first one. This one would involve 6 short 1 evidence unit body paragraphs where you're not necessarily actually having multiple sources in one paragraph. You're just basing each paragraph on a single idea, a single problem. So you have mentioned problem 1 you have your introduction paragraph. Then you mentioned the first problem, and the evidence unit would naturally contain something from a text, a quote or paraphrase from the unit. So actually in the packet that you read for the fishbowls, or you could bring in an outside source if you want to do a little extra research. Go right ahead, I don't mind. And then of course you'll include the reasoning behind why this is a problem, and that will really serve as your explanation and reasoning. And then you're going to repeat that for the second problem and the third problem, right? So you end up with 3 one evidence unit body paragraphs. They might be 5 to 8 sentences long. And then you're going to present the solutions, right? So solution to problem number 1, and then these could come from more texts or outside sources. And then you need to develop them logically, right? Like either you need to explain like how that solution would actually work I want to make sure this is clear. Explain how the solution would solve the problem. Explain how your solution would solve the problem, right? When I say developed logically here, I mean to tell you that you don't necessarily have to have a text that presents this solution that you're bringing in. Instead, you could present your own solution, and you can use logical argument in order to explain how that solution might work without necessarily bringing in a source to support your perspective. That would be fine. And then you need to do the same thing again for both of these other paragraphs. So you would end up with 6, relatively short paragraphs in this essay overall. I'm going to add these here to make sure that you can see them. Righty. And that one is green. So, and then of course you'll have a conclusion. The conclusion can be brief. I'm not going to look very hard at it. There's the argument conclusions activity you did back in February, where you can see a few moves you could make in the conclusion. Just look through those. If it's a solid conclusion, like if it accomplishes what you wanted to accomplish, that's what I care about. Does it solid? Does it actually match your essay? Does it work? Other than that, I'm not going to be that focused on the quality of your conclusion. So Alrighty here. So here's another approach that you might take instead. If you don't want to have 6 body paragraphs with 1 evidence unit, you could also do 3 body paragraphs with 2 evidence units each, where you present each problem and its solution together. So you have an introduction, which of course is all the information that's back up here that we went over, hook exigence thesis. And then you present a problem from a text or outside source, and you need to defend it, like why is this actually a problem? That's evidence unit 1. And then your second evidence unit presents the solution, either using a source, so some text from the unit or an outside source, or logical development. And then you do the same thing here. And so these paragraphs would naturally be longer. I'm thinking like 8 sentences minimum, right? Maybe longer, maybe more like 12 to 16 sentences, so much longer paragraphs. And then so you go and you do that 3 times, one for each of the problems that are presented in your thesis statement in order. And same thing for the conclusion, brief conclusion. Alrighty, so these are your approaches. You should your next step here is going to be to draft a thesis statement. So you should maybe go through these, decide if you like one of these, decide if you need to make changes to your thinking sheet that you've submitted, make some revisions, and then use that as the basic skeleton of your essay. Alrighty, bye-bye.